Virginia wakes beneath a veil of mist, its forests hushed, its rivers slow and watchful, its hills rising like ancient burial mounds softened by centuries of rain. Before the colonies, before Jamestown's struggle, before the rise of the Powhatan Confederacy, this land was ruled by leaders whose names have faded into whispers. Chiefs. Chieftains. Kings. Powerful figures whose reigns ended in ways that defy explanation. Some died suddenly, struck down by forces no warrior ever saw. Others vanished into forests said to be forbidden. A few ruled from thrones no tribe now claims, thrones spoken of only in fragments of oral tradition, as if remembering them carries danger. Archaeologists uncover pottery, tools, and burial sites, but the oral stories tell of something darker: chieftains struck down by invisible forces, rulers who carried curses carved into their lineage, and leaders whose authority came from places the living were warned never to enter. In the shadows of Virginia's mountains, old stories speak of forbidden thrones, ancient seats of power inherited from peoples long vanished. In the tidewater swamps, elders whisper of rulers who tried to claim sacred ground, and died without a mark on their bodies. Recorded history shows only fragments, scattered references, half-translated accounts, colonial scribes noting strange tribal fears. But beneath that thin surface lie legends buried so deep that only the oldest families still recall them. These stories paint a picture of rulers who held power at great cost, leaders who may have been erased intentionally, struck from memory by their own people, or consumed by forces no one dared challenge. And so, as fog curls around Virginia's forgotten earthworks and ancient groves, a single question rises like breath from the soil: who were these rulers, why were they cursed, and why do their stories still haunt Virginia's soil? Virginia's official history begins with the familiar: the rise of the Powhatan Confederacy, the intricate alliances of Algonquian-speaking tribes, the rival chiefdoms of the Monacan and Manahoac to the west, and the remnants of earlier Mississippian-influenced societies scattered across river valleys and mountain foothills. Textbooks present these worlds as orderly, knowable, even predictable. Chiefs led their towns. Paramount chiefs ruled alliances. Power passed through lineages shaped by tradition and territory. But this narrative, though tidy, contains deep fractures. Colonial chroniclers recorded only the leaders they encountered: Wahunsinkaw, Powhatan, Opachancanough, Necatoans, but countless earlier rulers appear only as shadows in foreign accounts. Some are mentioned once, then vanish. Others appear in oral tradition with no corresponding written record, rulers whose names survive only in fragments, as if deliberately left incomplete. There are missing genealogies everywhere. Entire leadership lines dissolve without explanation. In some tribes, a chief is named, and then the next known leader appears generations later, with no record of succession. Archaeology reveals abrupt shifts in burial customs and political centers, suggesting sudden transitions in power, not peaceful evolution. Something ended these leadership lines, but what? When colonists questioned tribal elders about certain ancient rulers, the answers were evasive. Some leaders were said to have been taken. Others struck down. Still others simply never spoken of. To the English, these silences were bewildering. To the tribes, they were warnings: some stories were not meant for outsiders. Even within the Powhatan world, one of the most well-documented indigenous structures on the continent, there are unexplained gaps. Early Spanish and English records mention chieftains who do not appear in later genealogies at all, as if their existence had been erased. A few accounts describe towns abandoned after the death of a leader, their people refusing to say why. These were not political collapses. They were breaks in the lineage, events so disturbing they fractured memory itself. Mississippian chiefdoms that once influenced parts of Virginia left signs of powerful rulers, massive mounds, ceremonial centers, but no surviving names. Their governments appear to have ended suddenly, with no indication of warfare or invasion. It is as though the leadership dissolved from within. The official history offers explanations: disease, conflict, migration. Yet these answers fail to account for the consistency of the silences, the repeated pattern of rulers acknowledged but avoided, remembered only in cautionary whispers. What remains unspoken in public textbooks is this: many of Virginia's earliest rulers were not forgotten by accident. They were removed, excised from history by their own descendants, or avoided by colonial record-keepers afraid to document what they heard. Perhaps their reigns ended in violence too strange to write down. Perhaps their power was tied to practices colonists didn't dare preserve. Perhaps their names carried weight, or danger, in ways the English could not understand. Beneath the neat structure of official history lies something fractured, unsettling, and ancient, a world of rulers who were remembered only long enough to be erased. Long before Powhatan united the Tidewater tribes, before the English stepped onto the shores of the James River, and before oral tradition solidified into its current form, there are whispers of a paramount chief so powerful, so feared, and so tragically undone that his existence survives only in fragmented stories. He ruled, it is said, over a kingdom stretching across the Tidewater region, a network of villages, ceremonial centers, and fortified sites built long before Powhatan's rise. And yet no written record names him. No genealogy includes him. No tribe claims him. This absence is the first mystery. Elders in scattered Algonquian communities tell of a ruler whose tomb was sealed with sky stones. These stones, described as bluish-black and shimmering like metal when held to firelight, were said to have fallen from the heavens, a gift from spirits or ancestors. They were set into the tomb's entrance not as decoration, but as a warning, that opening it would bring catastrophe. No tribe today acknowledges the location of this grave, but rumors place it somewhere along the lower James, hidden beneath a slope that floods only during powerful storms. Then there is the legend of his crown, a strange circlet said to be fashioned from a metal unknown to the region's early cultures. Some describe it as pale and cold, others as dark and engraved with symbols no one could read. A few versions claim the crown hummed when storms approached, as if reacting to forces beyond human understanding. No indigenous metallurgy existed in the Tidewater at that time, which makes the story even more baffling. Where did this metal come from? Who forged it? And why did its existence terrify the tribes who later occupied the land? According to the most unsettling versions of the legend, the chief's kingdom fell because a curse was pronounced. This curse did not come from a rival tribe, nor from an enemy warrior, but from within his own court. Some stories say the chief attempted to wield forbidden power tied to the sky stones. Others claim he violated sacred ground or broke a pact with ancient spirits who guarded the coastal forests and marshlands. When the curse took effect, the chief's people fled their towns. Entire villages emptied overnight. Structures were left standing, tools abandoned, fires still burning. Archaeologists working near the James River have uncovered artifacts that seem to echo these stories. Stone beads and pendants bearing unfamiliar motifs. Burials containing materials not native to the region. Ceremonial features predating known tribes by centuries. Foundations of circular structures unlike Powhatan or Algonquian architecture. Some excavations revealed metallic fragments in contexts far older than European contact, fragments that were quietly catalogued, then never displayed. There is a growing suspicion among independent researchers that this ruler belonged to a forgotten dynasty, erased from memory not by chance, but deliberately. Colonial scribes may have ignored indigenous accounts they found too strange or supernatural. Later tribes may have buried the story out of fear, shame, or respect for powers best left unmentioned. Over time, the legend dissolved, leaving behind only scattered hints in the soil and whispered fragments in elder councils. The vanished paramount chief remains a ghost at the edge of history, a ruler too old to place, too powerful to ignore, and too dangerous for anyone to openly remember. Central Virginia's Piedmont region is a land of rolling hills, ancient river terraces, and quiet clearings where the forests seem to circle inward, as though guarding secrets older than tribal memory. Scattered across these hills lie stone circles, low ceremonial mounds, and elevated earthen platforms, sites where rulers were once chosen, councils assembled, and power was conferred. These places appear peaceful now, swallowed by oak and pine. But for centuries, they were feared. Not because of war or enemies, but because of what happened to those who dared sit upon their thrones. According to local oral traditions, particularly among Monacan and Saponi descendants, certain leadership sites in the Piedmont carried reputations so ominous that only the bravest, or most desperate, accepted their authority. One legend speaks of a chieftain who died within months of taking power on a hill near present-day Amherst County. His skin turned gray, his breath shortened, and his hunters refused to enter the forest where he claimed to have seen shapes standing among the trees. After his death, the hill was abandoned for decades. Another story tells of a king struck by lightning under a perfectly clear sky. Witnesses described no clouds, no thunder, only a flash of white light and a smell like burning metal. The ruler fell instantly, leaving his council to flee the site and declare it forbidden. For generations afterwards, no one built so much as a fire on that hill. Then there were the councils that dissolved after omens appeared. At one stone circle near the James River headwaters, a council gathering ended abruptly when a sound like a distant howl rose from beneath the earth. At another, observers claimed to see flickering lights, embers that walked, approaching from the forest edge. These events were not recorded by colonists, but the tribal oral histories are precise. Leaders who tried to claim sacred authority in the wrong place met unnatural ends. Such stories were not isolated. Monacan and Saponi elders spoke of high places where leaders could only be chosen after consulting the Watchers, not spirits in a vague sense, but entities described as guardians of ancient laws, older than the tribes themselves. The Watchers approved or condemned rulers. If a leader ascended to power without their blessing, disaster followed. Some legends claim the Watchers lived in the hills themselves, appearing only as signs, sudden winds, strange lights, or dreams that left warriors shaken for days. The scientific explanations for these accounts are predictable. Historians point to disease. Archaeologists suggest lightning from unseen storm buildup. Anthropologists propose social unrest or political rivalry. But the mythic narratives refuse such simplicity. They describe patterns, not coincidences, rulers who met identical fates at distant sites, political lines wiped out in a single night, entire villages abandoned after a leader fell ill without warning. Some of these leadership mounds contain unusual magnetic signatures, confusing compasses, and causing electrical anomalies even today. Others sit atop geological fault lines that emit low-frequency vibrations, a phenomenon some researchers associate with dizziness, anxiety, and hallucinations. Yet these scientific threads fail to explain the consistency of the legends, or why tribes so far apart shared nearly identical warnings. Certain places were never meant to crown a ruler. In these cursed thrones of the Piedmont, power came with a cost. The hills chose their leaders, and sometimes, they chose to take them back. Before Wahunsenka, whom history remembers as Powhatan, united the Tidewater chiefdoms into a powerful confederacy, the tribes of coastal Virginia spoke of earlier rulers whose stories now hover between myth and forbidden memory. These were leaders said to have wielded supernatural gifts, rulers guided by stars, warriors who could change shape, and giants who walked the forests in ages before the English ever saw the Chesapeake. Their tales survive only in fragments, whispered in council houses, recorded imperfectly by colonists, and preserved in the coded language of oral tradition. Powhatan himself hinted at 3 predecessors whose reigns ended under strange, disturbing circumstances. Colonial accounts mention them obliquely, names half-written, stories half-believed, because even Powhatan's people refused to speak of them openly. 1. The star-guided king. The first of these forbidden rulers was said to navigate by the sky in ways no human should. Tribal elders described him as one who walked with the stars, a leader who received visions during celestial alignments and claimed guidance from beings in the upper world. He led migrations, founded villages along precise astronomical lines, and built ceremonial centers oriented to solstice dawns. Then, according to legend, he vanished. Some stories say he walked into the swamps after a comet appeared overhead and never returned. Others claim the sky beings reclaimed him. Archaeological surveys have uncovered pre-Powhatan earthworks aligned to celestial markers, structures older than the Confederacy yet unmistakably intentional. Powhatan reportedly forbade discussion of this ruler, insisting the past remain closed. 2. The giant of the Tidewater, another predecessor, was remembered as a towering figure, a giant in both stature and reputation. Some tales describe him literally as enormous, others use giant symbolically, referencing spiritual strength or forbidden lineage. Either way, this ruler was said to possess unmatched physical power, able to uproot trees or hurl spears farther than any warrior. His kingdom was prosperous, until the night he disappeared. Tribal traditions say that after defying a sacred law, the giant king challenged a being referred to only as the Deep One, a spirit tied to rivers and tidal waters. By dawn, his longhouse was found collapsed, the village abandoned in terror. Excavations near the James River reveal unusual burial pits and massive post holes, far larger than typical structures, hinting that a leader of unusual presence once lived there. Powhatan refused to include this figure in his lineage. Colonists noted only that there was fear around his name. 3. The Shapewalker Sovereign, the third forbidden ruler, appears most often in stories whispered among the Pamunkey and Chickahominy, a shape-shifting king, a leader whose form changed in battle or ritual. Some legends say he could become a shadow, an animal, a mist along the riverbanks. Others interpret these accounts metaphorically, as descriptions of a political mastermind, someone who shifted alliances and identities. Either way, he met a terrifying end. On the eve of a great council gathering, he simply collapsed, his body unmarked, his breath gone. Witnesses claimed a dark mist rose from the ground as he fell. Within days, the council dissolved and the site was abandoned. Archaeological digs around this region uncovered ritual circles, burnt offerings, and a large unmarked grave, dating centuries before Powhatan's rise. Powhatan's priests would not speak of this ruler at all. The throne with a shadow behind it. Colonial records reveal that Powhatan himself acknowledged these ancient rulers only when pressed, and always with caution. Tribal leaders insisted that the throne he inherited was heavy with forgotten stories, that his authority rested atop lineages stained by curses, disappearance, and supernatural intervention. The psychological intrigue lies here. Powhatan did not forge a new political system. He revived one whose earlier kings had been erased. He inherited a throne with a dark, ancient past, one older than any written memory, preserved only in warning. The ghosts of his predecessors linger still, their stories half buried in legend, their ruins scattered along the Tidewater, their fates etched into Virginia's soil. Scattered along Virginia's ancient river routes and hidden deep within forgotten trade paths are the oracle stones, smooth boulders etched with strange markings, places the tribes once approached with reverence and dread. These stones were believed to speak, not through voices but through signs, dreams, and omens. Chiefs and rising leaders sought them for guidance, yet many who stood upon them never returned home the same. Some died within days. Others fell ill under bizarre circumstances. A few vanished entirely, as though the stones had claimed them. The oracle stones bear unusual carvings unlike typical Algonquian or Siouan art. Spirals intersect with claw-like notches, elongated humanoid shapes lean toward stars or rivers, geometric patterns seem almost like coded warnings. Archaeologists classify them as ritual art or ancient trail markers. But their symbols defy easy translation. Elders say each mark once carried meanings no one speaks aloud anymore. Night travelers sometimes reported that certain stones glowed faintly, as if catching moonlight where no moonlight reached. A blue-white sheen, a shimmer like wet granite, or a pulse of reflected fire that vanished when approached. These phenomena were dismissed as tricks of light, mineral composition, or phosphorescent lichen. But warriors who kept watch insisted the stones seemed awake, responding to footsteps, to chants, to the presence of those who sought their counsel. Oral tradition holds that several chiefs performed leadership rites at these stones and met dreadful fates. One Monacan leader collapsed the morning after seeking guidance during a drought, his skin appeared burned though there had been no fire. A Saponi War chief who stood on an oracle stone before a major hunt vanished that very night, his tracks ended abruptly at the river's edge. A Tidewater ruler who defied his elders and placed both hands on the stone during a ceremony was said to have lost his sight within hours. Elders warned rulers never to stand upon these stones, never to put their weight, their ambition, or their future upon something older than their bloodline. The stones were believed to hold memories, secrets, and the power to judge a leader's soul. Those judged unworthy paid a price. Archaeologists remain skeptical. They attribute the misfortunes to disease, coincidence, or exaggerated storytelling. Geological surveys find nothing unusual, no radiation, no magnetic anomalies strong enough to harm a person. And yet the pattern remains impossible to ignore. Leaders who sought the stone's approval often suffered, while those who avoided them lived long, untroubled lives. To the people of the old tribes, the stones were not simply markers, they were thresholds. Places where the living brushed against forces older than tribes, older than kingdoms, older than the very forests themselves. Forces that did not forgive arrogance or overreach. Whether cursed, sacred, or simply misunderstood, the oracle stones left a trail of doomed chiefs in their wake. And the land remembers their stories far more clearly than the history books ever will. If Virginia's cursed leaders truly existed, their presence should echo in the soil, and it does. Across the Tidewater, Piedmont, and Blue Ridge foothills, archaeologists, collectors, and even unsuspecting farmers have unearthed artifacts that should not exist, relics tied by legend and context to vanished rulers who left behind no names, only warnings. These objects are rarely displayed, rarely studied, often dismissed as out of context, yet they form a pattern too coherent, and too unsettling, to ignore. Among the most striking finds are copper ceremonial pieces discovered in layers centuries older than any recorded metallurgy in the region. Shallow bowls, thin rods, and curved fragments bearing hammer marks have surfaced along the James and Rappahannock. They show evidence of heating and shaping, techniques unknown among early Virginia tribes. When these items surfaced in the late 1800s, museums quietly labeled them trade pieces, despite their isolation from any known trade routes. Private collectors whispered otherwise. These were regalia, remnants of rulers whose authority predated Powhatan himself. Then there are the carved stone scepters, long, polished staffs of unusually heavy stone, decorated with spirals and flowing lines unlike Algonquian or Siouan styles. Several were found miles from any documented settlement, buried deliberately in riverbanks or sealed in shallow pits. Their carvings resemble power symbols, possibly used in coronation rites or rituals of judgment. Indigenous elders claim these scepters belonged to kings who were warned, rulers whose reigns ended in silence. Archaeologists, unable to classify them, typically list them as ceremonial batons, or isolated artifacts of unknown origin. More disturbing are the masks with non-native features, elongated noses, deep eye sockets, bearded chins. At least 3 have been documented in the past century, though none remain in public view. One surfaced during construction near the York River, carved from a pale stone with a haunting, almost regal expression. Another was found in a riverbed after a storm, only to vanish into a private collection days later. Elders refused to look at them, claiming these masks represented rulers who came from elsewhere, or beings who walked from the underworld. The most controversial discoveries are the fragmented crowns, bands of hammered metal or hard stone carved into curved shapes, found in burial mounds older than the Powhatan line. One crown fragment bore a repeating pattern of triangles and serpent-like lines, symbols not tied to any known regional art. Another appeared to be made of a strange alloy, darker than copper, lighter than iron, and unidentifiable with early 20th century testing. These fragments are almost never discussed in academic literature. Some were quietly acquired by museums and placed in storage without analysis. Why the silence? Because these objects suggest a hierarchy that contradicts accepted history, a ruling class predating known tribes, using materials and symbols unexplained by regional archaeology. They hint at foreign rulers, supernatural rituals, or a dynasty erased for reasons still buried in the soil. Academics avoid the topic to escape accusations of pseudo-history, institutions bury the artifacts to avoid controversy, collectors hide them to avoid seizure. Yet the pattern remains: where Virginia's cursed leaders were said to rule, forbidden artifacts gather like shadows: copper regalia, stone scepters, strange masks, broken crowns. Each one a fragment of a past too complex, and too disturbing, for history to comfortably hold. By the time Virginia's legends reach their darkest corners, a single question grows louder than the rest: who were the rulers whose lives ended in curses, silence, and erasure? Their stories lie at the intersection of archaeology, myth, and something older than both. To understand them is to peel back layers of history that official timelines refuse to touch. No single theory explains everything, but each offers a glimpse into the shadows. 1. A pre-Powhatan elite class with advanced knowledge. Some researchers propose that before Powhatan consolidated the Tidewater tribes, the region was governed by an older elite class, rulers who possessed unusual ritual or spiritual knowledge. Their authority may have come from mastery of astronomical alignments, agricultural timing, or metallurgical experimentation now lost to history. Artifacts tied to these rulers, copper regalia, carved scepters, masks with unfamiliar features, support the idea of a specialized, possibly hereditary leadership caste. If this is true, Powhatan did not build his confederacy on a blank slate. He inherited a fractured landscape where an older system of rulership had collapsed, violently or mysteriously, leaving only warnings behind. 2. Remnants of an ancient Mississippian priest-king lineage. Another theory links Virginia's cursed rulers to the Mississippian world, the mound-building priest-kings of Cahokia, Etowah, and Moundville. These priest-kings performed rites of solar alignment governed through divine authority, used copper, exotic stonework, and ritual masks vanished from history in abrupt collapses. Archaeologists have found subtle traces of Mississippian influence in Virginia's Piedmont. Serpentine engraving, ceremonial mounds, burial artifacts matching patterns in the southeast. It's possible that a branch of Mississippian priest-kings established a kingdom in Virginia, only to fall victim to internal revolt. Spiritual crisis, or catastrophic upheaval that the tribes later encoded as curses. 3. Migrants from the Caribbean or Central America. Some legends speak of rulers with foreign features, tall, pale, bearded, or carrying symbols unknown to Algonquian cultures. These descriptions echo stories from the Caribbean and Mesoamerica, where seafaring groups traveled far along coastal currents. Ancient migrants could have reached Virginia's shores, via Gulf Stream routes through pre-Columbian trade networks, or as fleeing survivors of collapsed Caribbean chiefdoms. If so, they may have brought unfamiliar rituals, objects, or political styles. Their presence would have been shocking to local tribes, leading to assimilation, resistance, or violent removal, later mythologized as curses. This theory explains the masks with non-native features, unusual alloys and crown fragments, oral traditions describing rulers from elsewhere, but it raises its own chilling question: what forced such migrants to flee, and what followed them to Virginia? 4. A supernatural tradition of chosen rulers, bound by rituals. Many tribes believed leadership was not simply inherited, it was bestowed, often by forces beyond human society. In this interpretation, the cursed rulers were not political figures but chosen vessels, bound to rituals that demanded obedience. If these leaders violated sacred covenants, the consequences could be fatal: lightning strike, deaths, mysterious illness, collapse of leadership lines, councils disbanding overnight. The oracle stones, cursed thrones, and ominous omens all fit this pattern. These rulers may have wielded power granted by ancient spirits, and paid for it when they strayed. 5. A real ancient dynasty erased by disaster or war. The most grounded, yet unsettling, theory suggests Virginia once hosted a real dynasty, older than Powhatan's line, whose collapse was so traumatic that the tribes erased it from collective memory. The erasure could have come from catastrophic disease, famine, mass betrayal, civil war, or supernatural interpretations of real events. Burial mounds containing unusual regalia hint at rulers who commanded resources, labor, and religious authority. The sudden collapses in leadership lines and abandoned ceremonial sites reflect a dynasty extinguished without transition. Why erase them? Perhaps the rulers were tyrannical. Perhaps they violated sacred laws. Perhaps they brought disaster through arrogance or forbidden rituals. Or perhaps the aftermath was so horrific that silence became a form of protection. Virginia's stories of cursed rulers do not survive in textbooks, museum displays, or tidy historical summaries. They endure only in fragments, whispered by elders, tucked inside colonial footnotes, or hidden in archaeological anomalies that no one wishes to explain. These legends are not forgotten by accident. They are avoided, deliberately or subconsciously, because they challenge everything we think we know about the region's past. One reason for this avoidance lies in colonial suppression of indigenous spiritual traditions. Early English settlers were deeply unsettled by native cosmology, visions, curses, omens, sacred thrones, star-guided rulers. Anything that hinted at supernatural authority or ancient powers was dismissed as heathen superstition, dangerous storytelling, or outright devilry. Colonial scribes recorded only what fit their worldview: political alliances, trade, conflict. The deeper legends, especially those involving cursed kings or vanished dynasties, were quietly dropped from the written record. Compounding this suppression was the disappearance of early oral accounts. Disease, displacement, warfare, and forced assimilation shattered the continuity of many tribes' storytelling traditions. Whole lineages of storytellers vanished. Ritual knowledge passed through specific families was lost forever. The legends that survived did so in fragments, protected by a handful of elders who refused to let them die, even as colonial pressure grew. Another source of silence is the conflict between these legends and accepted historical models. Official narratives paint pre-contact Eastern America as politically simple: chiefdoms, confederacies, alliances, structured but not elaborate. Yet the forbidden ruler stories point to something older and more complex: dynasties, rival kingships, priestly castes, and catastrophic collapses long predating Powhatan. Acknowledging these stories would force historians to rethink regional development, population waves, and cultural evolution. There is also a deeper academic discomfort. These legends imply the possibility of early advanced leadership cultures in Eastern America, societies with ceremonial metals, astronomical knowledge, ritual thrones, and political structures erased before Europeans arrived. Such implications directly challenge long-standing assumptions about technological and social timelines, making many scholars hesitant to investigate further. But the most sensitive barrier is this: these legends are soaked in supernatural elements. Lightning-struck kings, shape-shifting rulers, oracle stones that doom the unworthy, burial mounds humming with strange energy. Academia fears that touching these stories risks blurring the line between legitimate archaeology and speculative myth, a line most institutions guard fiercely. And yet, the silence is not absolute. A handful of modern researchers and archaeologists have shown interest in these legends. Some traveled to sacred Piedmont sites, others interviewed tribal historians, a few quietly analyzed forbidden artifacts. But several of these researchers later admitted, off record, that they were discouraged from pursuing the topic too deeply. Grants evaporated. Universities warned against controversial interpretations. Museum curators hinted that certain discoveries were better left unpublicized. The pressure was subtle, never explicit, but unmistakable. Despite all this, tribal memory persists. Even when scholars ignore the stories, they remain alive in ceremonies, in winter tales, in whispered cautions passed through generations. The elders continue to speak of cursed kings, of vanished dynasties, of thrones no one should claim. They keep these stories not for entertainment, but because they believe forgetting them is dangerous. Official silence may dominate written history, but in Virginia's forests, rivers, and burial hills, the truth still stirs, older than the colonies, older than Powhatan, older than any academic timeline. Some legends are forbidden because they threaten the past. Others because they threaten the present. Virginia's rulers belong to both. Virginia's landscapes breathe with memory. The forests whisper in the wind, the rivers drag ancient secrets beneath their currents, and the hills rise like silent monuments to stories the earth refuses to release. Long before the colonies took root, long before Powhatan shaped his confederacy, this land belonged to rulers whose reigns ended in mystery, kings struck down without wounds, chieftains erased from lineage, leaders swallowed by curses older than any tribe now living. Their presence lingers not in written record, but in the texture of the land itself, a stone circle hidden beneath oak leaves, a burial mound no map acknowledges, a copper fragment glinting in river mud, a mask found and quickly forgotten. Each discovery feels like an echo, faint yet insistent, reminding us that the official timeline is only the surface of something much deeper. Archaeologists dig, scholars translate, and researchers debate, but the truth remains elusive, scattered in fragments across the Tidewater, the Piedmont, and the Blue Ridge shadows. Every unearthed artifact, every unexplained mound, every whispered legend pushes the boundary of what we think we know. It is as if Virginia's ancient rulers left clues deliberately, the way a fading dynasty might hide its legacy beneath soil and silence, waiting for the right moment, or the right seeker, to bring it to light. Even now, the stories refuse to die. Elders still speak of forbidden thrones. Hunters still avoid oracle stones. Rivers still shift around burial sites as though protecting them. And the hills, timeless and patient, continue to guard their secrets. Perhaps these rulers were never forgotten. Perhaps they were concealed, their names buried by fear, their feats hidden by trauma, their downfall sealed by forces no one dared challenge. And perhaps they still watch. From beneath the earth. From behind the legends. From the ruins no one names aloud. Because one truth pulses beneath every artifact and every story left behind, maybe the rulers aren't forgotten, maybe they're waiting for someone brave enough to uncover the story they died protecting.